That all my good works and my good deeds and perfectly following and outlining and trying to follow the law, that I'm still going to fall short. And God still fell upon the temple, even in all their imperfection, even in their weakness. And so I sympathetically look at Solomon and say, I get it. I get it because I've done it, because I've strayed and I've added to things and I've tried to think of a better way to do it than the way God has prescribed it. So I have mercy toward those and toward myself in that matter, and trying to come back to the original prescription of prayer and Bible study and what God has called us to. But I also acknowledge mercy toward myself and others in that His Spirit falls on that temple, because that's what He chose to do. We're going to be going through every temple created and the original prescription in the tabernacle we've already covered, but then really looking at Jesus and His interactions with the temple, because there are so many things that Jesus says and does while in the temple that has implications in what He's saying. And so there are bigger pictures where the Jewish listeners would have already acknowledged what He was talking about, because He is in the temple and referring to things in the temple. And so I love this teaching. To be honest with you, it's my favorite to walk through, and it's my favorite to re-study time and time again, because there is so much truth and meat and beauty to Jesus and His interactions with the temple. But in order to do that, we want to understand the temple, why God originally prescribed it. And we saw that last time as we looked at the tabernacle of meeting in Moses. But now to go on today to talking about the house of Yahweh. And with this, we're wanting to understand the Jewish heart of worship, how the Jewish people longed for the temple. And the best way I can do that is to hear from the Jewish listeners themselves in the book of Psalms, chapter 84, verse 1 through 4, and then I'll read verse 10, just for time's sake. We're going to hear the heart of the Jewish worshiper toward the temple, their affection and their love for the temple. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of hosts! My soul longs, yes, faints for the courts of the Lord. My heart and flesh sing for joy to the living God. Even the sparrow finds a home, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may lay her young at your altars, O Lord of hosts. My King and my God, blessed are those who dwell in your house, ever singing your praise, Selah. For a day in your courts is better than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of wickedness. And so we see this terminology and this wording. We hear about the courts. How lovely are your courts? And we hear about a doorkeeper. We understand the entrance into the temple being a door. And how lovely is your dwelling place, the dwelling place of God, the place where God decides to meet with man. The original prescription of the tabernacle that was outlined for man to meet with God, for man to have his sins absolved through sacrifice. And so we see the beauty of the heart of the worshiper here in the book of Psalms. And we see the affection for the temple, the affection that we see here. For a day in your courts is better, one day, than 1,000 elsewhere. To be in the courts of the tabernacle, praising and worshiping God and offering sacrifices. Well, we are talking about the house of Yahweh, the house of God. And in order to do that, now we're going to move on to the Temple of Solomon. And understanding the Temple of Solomon, I think, will shed light, because much like the tabernacle of meeting, the presence of God falls upon the first temple built by Solomon during its inauguration. And so in the book of 2 Chronicles, we're going to see that the temple is being dedicated to God. Now, this is a massive celebration where there is musical instruments and priests, and the people have gathered in great numbers in order to celebrate the inauguration, the establishment of the temple. They've spent 7 years building this temple. For 7 years, materials have been gathered even before that. We'll look at here in a minute, but the anticipation for the finishing of this temple and the beauty of this temple. At this point, thousands upon thousands of people were involved in this 7-year process of this building. 70,000 bore burdens. 70,000 people bore burdens in the building of the temple. 80,000 worked in quarries. 80,000 people hewing out stone in order to bring into the temple courts to build the first stationary temple, the Temple of Solomon. 3,600 were overseers. Those are the ones that are overseeing the project. Hence the word overseer. So these are guys that are in charge. It took 3,600 people to oversee that many people bearing burdens in the building of the temple. That's a lot of leaders. And if you've ever been in leadership and you know what it means to run something of a large capacity, how much more so a building that took 3,600 leaders and overseers to coordinate the building of this, to make sure that everything was done decent and in order for the opportunity to optimize the building process. And so 3,600 were overseers, a pretty monumental task. No expense was spared. This is the height of the Jewish nation. David is leading a united Israel. Then Solomon is leading a united Israel. That may seem odd to you that I would say that, but the reality is under Rehoboam, Solomon's son, the kingdoms are split between the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And so at this time, they're not split. This is under Solomon's leadership. All of Israel, the entire nation of Israel, is united in the worship of Yahweh and united as a nation. And so they're all involved in this dedicatory process of acknowledging this new temple that took 7 years to build and all that went into building that temple. There were so many sacrifices on the day of the dedication that they could not be counted. Now that is a ton of sacrifices. When we see the numbering of those who bore burdens already and those who were overseers, and now they're saying that they can't even count the sacrifices. Well, they haven't had a problem counting up until now, so that tells me that there were sacrifices too numerable to count and happening so quickly and continuously throughout the day that they lost count of the number of sacrifices. This is the kind of celebration. The music is cued, the sacrifices are happening, the priests are dressed in all their priestly garbs, the people have gathered with great anticipation, and the temple of God is being established in Israel. Well, if we remember back to David, and David was a man after God's own heart. He was a man who wanted the temple to be built, a permanent dwelling place. It was his desire. Well, when the Ark of the Covenant is brought into Jerusalem for the first time, we hear the story of David and we see his heart of worship as he dances in front of the Ark. So exuberantly that one of his wives tell him that he's being undistinguished. He's a distinguished king. He shouldn't be dancing in front of the ark, but he doesn't care. He's so excited and filled with worship that the Ark of the Covenant is being brought into Jerusalem. He understands what that means, and he's celebrating, exuberantly worshiping before his God. He wants desperately to see a house built for God. Well, in 2 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 6, we see that they understood that a temple could not encompass all of who God is. That we couldn't trap him in a box. In 2 Chronicles chapter 2 verse 6 says this, "Who is able to build a house? Build him a house. Who is able to build him a house, since heaven and highest heaven cannot contain him?" Who am I to build a house for him, except as a place to make offering before him? Those are the words of Solomon. He acknowledges that he cannot encompass God in a dwelling place. He understands that this is not where God lives. This is not boxing him in. It is simply a place where God has decided, Yahweh has decided to meet with his people. I would say that he probably learned this from his father, because we see later that David acknowledges the same truth by saying, if I ascend to heaven, there you are. If I make my bed in Sheol, there you are. If I ascend to the heights of heaven, you're already there. If I descend into the belly of hell, you're already there. You are everywhere. You are omnipresent. You are everywhere at the same time. And even time does not encapsulate him. Even time cannot box him in, because he is the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. He's at the beginning and he's already at the end. So we see that just because they're building him a house, a permanent dwelling, does not mean it completely encompasses him, as some idol worship would purport in their teachings. And so, here's the heart of David. David desires to build God a house. He's a worshiper at heart. He plays a harp and he worships in the fields as a young boy. He writes music. If you've read the book of Psalms, it's the singer-songwriter David, for the most part, writing music and worship to his God. And so to hear that heart and to see that man dancing in front of the ark when it comes into town, you get the heart of this man who desperately wants to be a blessing to his people and a blessing to God. And his motives are, I would say, correct in building this house of worship, a permanent dwelling. This is the heart of David, a great heart of worship. Now, David not only desires to build him a house, but then God tells him he's not going to allow him to build it. And the reason he gives for not allowing David to build this house is that he's a man of bloodshed. So David is a warrior. He has fought his entire life. We see him in the valley of Elah with Goliath. But that's just the beginning. He lives a life of warfare. He's a man of bloodshed. We even know that his bloodshed wasn't just warlike. There were times where his own corrupt and wicked heart got the best of him, and we see the murder of Uriah, who was married to Bathsheba, and David commits adultery and then tries to silence his sin by killing Uriah, and he does. So he's a man of bloodshed. God will not allow him to build the temple, but he does allow his son Solomon to build the temple. So David, you've seen his heart of worship, trying to establish a place of dwelling for God, a place where everyone could come and worship. God says, no, you cannot do it yourself. I'll allow your son to. Well, this doesn't stop David from accumulating materials. So he wants to make sure that when his son Solomon walks into office, it's not just hopes and dreams, but it's actually material in hand to begin the building process. And so we're talking about Solomon's temple. Well, let's go back a little further. Even Jerusalem itself was acquired by David. David and his mighty men tunnel in through the Gihon Springs. You're going to see a slide of the city of David. It wasn't always called the city of David. It was a Jebusite city that was ruled by the Jebusites. David conquers that city. Him and his mighty men tunnel in through the Gihon Springs, and they come up into the city. While the men on the tops of the walls mocked David and his army and said, "You'll never conquer the city." Well, David comes in, tunnels in under the wall through the Gihon Springs and conquers the Jebusites. So not only is he going to be preparing material for his son, he's already conquered the land in which the temple would be placed. If that's not enough, he also purchases the ground. Now, there's the threshing floor of Aratna, the most famous threshing floor in all of Jewish history. Why is that? Because that's where the temple is built. There's a plague that breaks out in Israel, and David purchases the the threshing floor of Aratna to build an altar there to sacrifice to God in order to stay the plague, stay the hand of the plague. When he goes to Aratna to buy the threshing floor, Aratna, he says, just take the land, king. At this point, he already owns the city of David is now his. It's conquered. He owns Jerusalem. He's the king. And Aratna recognizes that, and he says, I'll just give you this piece of ground. It's yours. Take it. But King David says the beautiful lines. He says this, how can I give God something that costs me nothing? I want you to think about that for a minute. How can I give God something that costs me nothing? So even there we see the heart of worship for David. He wants to bring God something that costs something, that took blood, sweat, and tears to get. And so he purchases the threshing floor from Aratna. He owns it. Then he offers the sacrifice on it. This is the ancient ground of Moriah. We'll look at that in detail later. At that point, he expands the walls upward. You're going to see another slide where we move from the city of David, the city that he conquered from the Jebusites, and then he extends the wall upward to the right, top right of the picture you're looking at, all the way to the top. He extends the wall around the top of ancient Mount Moriah. He purchases the threshing floor from Aratna. He offers a sacrifice there. So he's conquered Jerusalem. He has the land. He's purchased the threshing floor of Aratna. Now he has the exact location in which the temple will be built. So David prepared for the building of his temple. We can give credit to Solomon, but the reality is the majority of work that I see happening happens under the reign of David from his heart of worship and wanting to build a temple for God. We see in 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 2 and 3, that David not only has the land and the threshing floor now to build the temple, but he's amassing great quantities of material, of cedar from Lebanon, and gold, and jewels, and all the things that are going to be used to building the temple. So, this is David in the heart of worship. And to understand Solomon's temple, I think we need to understand the heart in which that temple was established for in the first place. At one point, David sees the tabernacle of meeting that we've already studied in Shiloh, and he mourns because he sees that it has been neglected to some degree. And he says to himself, how can I dwell in palaces when God is being given this tent as his dwelling among men? And so from that heart comes all that we just talked about. The purchasing of material, the purchasing of land, the heart of worship that dances in front of an ark. This is David, the heart of worship that births the temple of Solomon. So yes, it's Solomon's temple. We attribute it to Solomon because it is built under his reign, but we see the heart of David at the roots of this temple being built. I love that from worship comes the temple of Solomon. Good intentions here in the building of the temple. Well, Solomon steps into office. It's like instant coffee, just add water. Now he has all the materials, he has the land, and the temple is erected. And we see Solomon does have a big part in this. For 7 years, he's assigning leadership and those to build the temple and going and getting additional material and those things. And so we see that he has a big part to play as well. And so credit is given to him, and rightfully so. So first of all, we saw the heart of David. Now we move on to the actual construction of this thing that took 7 years. And we're going to note some differences between the tabernacle of meeting and Solomon's temple. So, we see first of all that this is going to be much larger. We've got a side-to-side comparison here of the tabernacle of meeting, and then behind that you're going to see the Mishkan, the structure inside of the courts where the temple which is actually the temple. You're going to see that behind the tabernacle here in this picture. This difference in size comparison. We've got another size comparison here where we compare Solomon's temple, Moses' tabernacle, and an American football field. And so you can see there the difference in sizes and how large this really would have been if you've ever walked out onto a football field, close to the size of that. to see that this is the temple of Solomon. So he is doing it, and he's doing it bigger, but I would say not necessarily better. Better materials, as we'll see here in a minute, but the original prescription is my favorite because it's simple. It's not man adding upon God's original prescription as we see in Solomon's temple, but it is definitely bigger and the materials are finer materials. And so everything was cut and hewn outside of the temple. This is a pretty amazing feature of Solomon's temple, that when they're building this thing, they're not building it on site. They're building it off site. They're hewing the stones and cutting the wood and doing all the things that are required, but they're not doing it on Temple Mount because they don't want to belittle or defile, if you will, that sacred ground. They want silence and reverence on top of that worship structure, so that they're forming it outside and they're bringing it in, and then they're fitting it on site as delicately and quietly as possible. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. Recently, I built my son a shelf in his room. It's just a simple shelf, but it's pretty large. And so I did the measurements beforehand, and I realized that there's no way if I build this in my garage, I'm going to be able to fit it into his room. It's not going to fit. And I'm glad I figured out that at that time, because that really would have made me frustrated to have built the entire thing and then realize I couldn't even fit it through the door. I would have had to then disassemble it and reassemble it again. Well, I just want to tell you that it's difficult, and if you're builders, you know this, to build something outside of the area it's going in. There's so many variables and things you don't think about. Which side do I stain and which side do I not stain? Which side do I clear and fill the holes in? Because part of it's going against the wall and some of it's not necessary to do those things too. Well, sure enough, I built the entire thing outside of the room, and then I bring it into the room and I fit it, and there's about 5 things that I have to go back and forth and figure out because I didn't think of everything. And it's a simple shelf. We're talking about the Temple of Solomon being hewn, being planned, cut outside, and then put together on top of Temple Mount. That is a monumental feat. It's one that was done with great reverence. Because how much easier would it have been just to cut everything on site, to build everything on site, and if there's a problem in the moment, you fix it in the moment. That just shows you, once again, the heart of worship that's transferred from David to his son Solomon. And when he's constructing this temple, he's doing it with great reverence and godly fear as he does it the hardest way possible. And there was no other reason to do it like that other than reverence and love and worship for God. So we see the beginnings of this are a beautiful process of worship and reverence to God. Now, one thing you're going to see right away is that the size is 2 times, if not 2 times as big. And then the height is 3 times as tall when you look at the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies was a perfect square. I think it's important to note. It's 20 by 20 by 20 by 20. This is a perfect cube representing heaven and the perfection in heaven. The entire interior of this is all covered in cedar. So we looked at the tabernacle. We're talking about goat skins and linens and fabric and things of that nature and tanned animal skins. Now we're going to a permanent dwelling, and the entire interior of it is covered in cedar. This is a beautiful, beautiful structure that we see being built. The floor and the roof are pine, but the walls all cedar. The exterior walls are these large hewn stones. Once again, we're not using animal skins now like the tabernacle. We're not putting tent pegs in the ground. These are solid stones. And inside of those stones and inside of the building itself, there is cedar. On the floors, pine, and the ceiling, pine. Well, if that's not enough, then they overlay it all in pure gold of the interior. The interior is going to be all pure gold. This is an amazing structure. The door jambs are made from olive wood. The cherubim inside the Holy of Holies are made of olive wood and then covered in pure gold. The cherubim inside of the Holy of Holies covers the ark with one wing. So there are two cherubim, one on each side, and the wing of each cherubim is covering the Ark of the Covenant. Those wings are touching in the middle, and then their other wing is extending to the exterior wall. So when you walk into the Holy of Holies, you see the wings of a cherubim stretching from one wall to the other wall with the two cherubims combined. These are overlaid in pure gold. It was a sight to see. And the 7-year process is being celebrated as they celebrate the house of Yahweh. Now we see that Solomon, he takes it to a whole nother level. He covers everything in gold. He takes and he makes multiple lampstands. He makes multiple table of shewbread, the tables that have the bread of presence on it. He makes multiple tables for that. He is taking the original prescription and he's adding a bunch to it. Now, Dr. J. Vernon McGee says this: the tabernacle, meaning Moses' tabernacle, the tent dwelling, is a better picture of Christ than the temple. Why? I believe because it's the original prescription of God. What we see here is what God prescribes and then what man adds to it. Solomon also adds windows inside of the holy place. Multiple windows at the top. It just makes sense, right? That if you're going to build a structure like this, you need optimal light in order to function inside of that. But the original prescription was for one menorah to be lit inside of the holy place. And when you walked in, that was the singular light of the room. Jesus says this later, that he is the light of the world. And ultimately that we are the light of the world through him. That we are the salt of the earth. That there was an original prescription which was perfect. That Jesus, is the menorah. We'll look at that in detail later. But now Solomon's adding multiple menorahs. I believe it's 5 on each side. That's going to be 10 total. 5 on each side, 10 menorahs. There's only one in the original prescription. There's 10 menorahs and there's multiple lights up top. So is Solomon doing this with a good heart? It seems like the heart of worship is there, but I feel like he's added to the original prescription. He wants to do it bigger. He wants to do it better. If that's not enough, the bronze laver. There's one bronze laver. It's where the priests wash their hands and feet as they're making sacrifices. Well, in this situation, it would make sense because there's more people in the state of Israel. There's more sacrificial animals being offered. Therefore, we need more water. Well, he creates this laver that he calls a sea. And this sea holds 11,500 gallons. 11,500 gallons in that massive sea. Or what we would better understand as the laver that is in Moses' tabernacle of meeting. And if that's not enough, then he has multiple mini lavers throughout the courtyard just outside of the Mishkan, the structure. You're going to have 5 on each side, I believe. So you're 10 lavers and then the large sea. So really, you're talking about 11 lavers. There was 1 in the original prescription. Looks like Solomon is doing it bigger and what would appear to be better. There are precious stones used in the building of this as well. The finest of materials. We see that they employ a man named Hiram who works as a fine worker of bronze. The Bible sees fit to name him because he is a fine craftsman of bronze. And so we see that Solomon not only does it, but he does it bigger. But I would say not necessarily better. I want you to think about this. God made his original prescription. And now think of it in our own terms. Like, how many times do we try to add to what God has originally prescribed? I mean, the Word tells us, God tells us through His Word that we'll be washed by it. That we can fall in line with God's will, and we can see the power of prayer in our lives by falling on our knees and crying out to God for His help. That prayer and Bible study and witnessing are still the answer. But how many times do we say, that's great, God, but you know what? I got a good idea. What if I create this great illustration to go along with your word, and I add my secret sauce to it, and man, we're really going to win the loss together. Or how about I remove the altars from the church because the altars are offensive to people, therefore maybe I can reach more people because we've removed the altars. Well, what if I don't talk about the cross so much? Because the cross is an ugly form of capital punishment in the first century. Who wants to talk about a bloody cross? Let's talk about prosperity and blessing so that we can get as many people into the house of God as possible. And then when we get them there, we'll tell them about the cross. Listen, the gospel is not sleight of hand. It's not bait and switch. The original prescription is still the most potent. The Word of God studied will transform and wash your mind and your life. That if you resist the enemy, if you pray to God and resist the enemy, he will flee. That results truly come by Bible study and prayer. Oh, but prayer takes time and effort, and it's not easy. So what if I just came up with a plan to fix it on my own? Well, many times that can be done with good intentions. You know, when I first became a youth pastor, I read the book Purpose-Driven Church. And when I read that book, I saw a lot of good intention in that book. People that desperately wanted to reach the lost. I see the same good intention in Solomon. As he's building this temple, he wants to do it bigger and better and with finer materials. We're talking about Yahweh here and the worship of Yahweh. And so he adds upon adds to the original prescription. I see it the same in our day and age. Humanity hasn't changed. We want to take the easiest route possible. We want to dress it up and make it pretty and unoffensive. But I don't care what you do, the gospel is always offensive. And what you win people with, you've got to keep them with. There is no bait and switch. So although I see the original heart behind Solomon and books like the Purpose-Driven Church, what I also see is that we then begin to follow methods and not God. Our own ingenuity, our own wisdom, our own business savvy in order to accomplish things when God has prescribed prayer to accomplish things. Now, I will acknowledge a good heart and a good intention in some of these things. I myself read that book and applied some of those things in my early years of youth ministry. But as I've grown older, I've realized that I don't need to add much to His Word, if anything. Illustrations aren't wrong, and picture images. I mean, the gospel uses them in the book of Hebrews and throughout the Word. We're looking at images today to understand what we're really talking about. But if we're not careful, we'll be following methods and business models and not a sovereign God. Even though it's birthed in beauty, even though it's birthed in good intention, we've got to be careful to step back and examine our lives and ask ourselves, are we truly depending on God or are we depending on our own creativity? Now, we're going to end this talk by realizing that on the inauguration day, it tells us this, that the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. The glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. You see this in the original prescription in the tabernacle. God pours out His Spirit. His Spirit is evident in the place. There's a manifest presence of God. We see it in Solomon's temple on inauguration day. The manifest presence of God falls upon the temple. Everybody acknowledges it, that God has blessed this work. Even though Solomon, in my opinion, took it too far. Even though he added upon the original prescription. Maybe for the right motives, So we also must be careful in this, that in our judgment and in our understanding of things, that we are careful in throwing stones, because we can realize the original intent in the matter. And then we also realize that ultimately God is going to do what God's going to do. That in the same respect, that all my good works and my good deeds and perfectly following and outlining and trying to follow the law, that I'm still going to fall short. And God still fell upon the temple, even in all their imperfection, even in their weakness. And so I sympathetically look at Solomon and say, I get it. I get it because I've done it. Because I've strayed and I've added to things and I've tried to think of a better way to do it than the way God has prescribed it. So I have mercy toward those and toward myself in that matter, and trying to come back to the original prescription of prayer and Bible study and what God has called us to. But I also acknowledge mercy toward myself and others in that His Spirit falls on that temple, because that's what He chose to do. So today we have taken a look at Solomon's temple in all of its grandiose glory, all of the majesty and the gold-covered elements of worship and walls and the beauty that is this. And I want you to carry this into the next chapels, because this is the last time, well, not the last time, there's going to be one more time that we talk about, but the last time for a while that the Spirit of God falls upon the temple in a manifest way. He falls upon the tabernacle of meeting. He falls upon the temple of Solomon. But Zerubbabel's temple that we'll look at in the next lesson, Herod's temple, not only does the Spirit not fall on it like it did in previously, but there is no Ark of the Covenant. Because we're going to see that Solomon's temple is ransacked and leveled, and the elements of worship are taken and the Ark possibly hidden. So as we process this, as we talk about the house of Yahweh, we talk about the Jewish heart of worship, the heart of David in the building and preparing of material, the heart of Solomon to please God and to build this beautiful temple, all the majesty and glory that went into it, the reverence in the originally building it the most difficult way they could, strictly because they reverenced and feared God and wanted to do it in the right way. Then lastly, we see the mercy of God displayed as an imperfect temple that man had added to, His Spirit still falls on. Let's bow our heads. God, we love You and we thank You. I thank You for this ministry online. I thank You for all of those who listen, who are part of our congregation, who are not in this building every Thursday. God, I pray You bless their lives. You speak into them and You challenge us. You challenge us as ministers. You challenge us as Your children to follow Your original prescription, Lord Jesus, and to know You, to have the heart of David that dances in front of the ark, to have the heart of David that accumulates all that we can to honor You, to have the heart of Solomon that reverences Your name so much that not one noise and of a tool is made on top of Temple Mount. God, we thank You, and then we receive Your mercy and Your grace that we as imperfect, Lord, we ask that You would fall on our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.